want to talk a little bit more responding to some of the issues raised so far about sort of how we share experiences and lived experiences with value, um, including sort of different ways that young people's voices can be shared. Also sort of highlighting that insider research and sort of ways to mitigate some of the stigmas regarding insider research. Okay, so autoethnography, in the simplest form, is using your own lived experience to comment on social and cultural issues in a researcher sort of thing. Jim raised earlier this morning about the letters that people wrote and how biographers were questioning some of the autobiographers' sort of experiences. And I wonder if they were autoethnographers or if autoethnography was a thing back in the 70s. Whether that question would have been raised or been able to have been raised by other biographers. So we are systematically analysing, though, that's the difference between sort of the autobiographical works as opposed to autoethnographical work, in that you are systematically analysing your own experiences to influence social and cultural change. So what could autoethnography add to care experienced research? So we've talked a lot today about sort of that insight and empathy that comes with being a care experienced researcher or having an insider knowledge of care experience when doing research. And that insight and empathy allows for things like rapport to be built and allows for people to value that experience a bit more. It adds more purpose to the research as well. There's a lot more passion, I find, from insider researchers as opposed to those who haven't got as much experience of being care experienced. It helps participants and researchers feeling valued. One of the biggest things that is an issue in care experienced research is the issue of tokenism and not actually compensating young people for sharing such personal and thought-provoking experience. Whereas autoethnography would allow them to feel valued because they're sharing their experience for a specific purpose. And then adding more humanity to the research. Limitations of autoethnography, though, as already raised, my experiences are unique to me. They aren't representative of care experienced people, all care experienced people. For example, I'm in a very fortunate position in that I had the same social worker for 7.5 years and then the same pathway advisor for 5.5 years. So I have that is a very unique experience in the care experience care experience circle. It can be overly subjective because they are my own experiences. It can be hard to present them in an objective light. And other critics find autoethnography self-indulgent and or narcissistic. So I've popped in a bit of a meme here of when you ask a narcissist what their favorite person is, it's a mirror. This is also an allude, though, to a metaphor that I use in my own work, in that it's hard to reflect on something when the mirror is broken. So this is why I now have a broken mirror in this slide. So ways that I try to counter these limitations in my own work is by recognizing that no qualitative research in particular can be fully representative of a group being researched. It's about capturing the voices that want to be heard. And sometimes some people don't want to share those experiences at all. So there's no way to be fully representative of every care experienced person unless you speak to every single care experienced person. Additionally, it's hard to be representative and provide insight and empathy at the same time. Those who are particularly having experience being in care since the 2000s would have had the unfortunate experience of being compared to Tracy Beaker growing up, and the anger that a lot of care experienced people feel towards Tracy Beaker is because her experiences are not representative of our care experience. So that kind of sort of idea, even though you were compared to that kind of fictional character, it can't be representative of experience. So what I tried to do was use some techniques from writing research, particularly Mary Carr, The Art of Memoir, and medical humanities research, particularly using ideas from narrative theory and narrative reflection. And use those ideas to help me more objectively look at my experience. Going back to the Tracy Beaker example, I go on a 2,000 word rant about Tracy Beaker in my work. But when I stopped thinking about the social implications of that character compared to what the actual book does, I found a very unique example of a presentation of life story work, which is something I'll go on to in a minute, that isn't shared in any other care experience writing so far that I've come across. So a fictional autobiography can represent life story work, but I haven't found life story work in any other life writing example. Life story work is an intervention primarily used with care experienced young people to help them make sense of their lives. And it includes elements, it includes accounts from family members, previous teachers, previous foster carers, previous social workers. If it's done well, somebody will have gone through and researched and tried to gain as much perspectives as possible on that young person's life, and then shared with that young person in order to help them make sense of their life. This means that I had a lot of competing ideas of certain events of my life, but no one's truth is more truthful than anybody else's. It's just another perspective to consider when developing an understanding of a life journey. But again, broken mirror. It is very hard to reflect on something when the mirror is broken. So this is why I've used autoethnography the way I have. I wanted to give value to my experiences, but also the other people who added or contributed to my understanding of my own experience. I used this then to present a memoir as practice research. Practice research is where you're led by the practice and then able to use that practice to comment on social and cultural issues or whatever it is that you were trying to answer, the question that you were trying to answer. For me, that was what effect does life story work have on life writing. It's led to an insight into the experiences of life story work and information recording along with my journey through care, and allowed me to reflect on this from a researcher point of view, but also from a personal point of view. Instead of writing, and whilst I was in care, instead of writing as an undergraduate, I was able to use a postgraduate reflective lens in my work to help me make better sense. It also came in very handy for processing the death of my birth father. So the extended metaphor that I use is the memory hotel. And when my birth father died, I described a cataclysm, an explosion on one of the floors of my memory hotel, and then used this sort of piecing together memory fragments and debris as a way of processing that grief and that death and all those complex feelings from going from somebody who abused you dying. So I use my research as well now to instigate training. So I've brought new roles into my own local authority, including a subject access request support worker and life story workers that are trained in multiple models of life story work to better service their young people. I've produced insightful journal articles, and I've also made a course for for young people called Writing Lives and Life Writings that I deliver as part of the Brilliant Club, which is a charity that works primarily with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to help them aspire to university. And this course is based on my thesis, and the young people's writing is amazing. Some of them are care experienced, and others are not. But honestly, it really does. That I wish I could share some of their writing with you because it is beautiful, and I'm always very moved whenever I deliver this course. So the next slide contains a trigger warning, but it is a bit of an activity. The trigger warning is that it uses samples directly from my social services file and my life story book, and it covers things like mental health, and behaviours that I was presenting at the time that aren't good. If you need to take a minute out, please do. And if you need to talk about it afterwards, you're more than welcome to email me later. But one of the things that I do in the training that I deliver in particular is a spot the difference, highlighting information recording, good practice and not so good practice. And I compare my social services file to my life story book. All right, I'm going to give you another minute to have a little look at that. And then if you'd like to type some of the differences that you spot in the chat, that would be really helpful. Absolutely, Tara. It's definitely a lot less cold. Also less medicalized, absolutely, yeah. No relationships on the left, yeah. But they are described in the right, absolutely. Redacted in different ways. I will add that the coloured redactions are my own, just to protect the people that are mentioned in there. Yeah, in a non-grammatical level, yeah, you can tell this is a very rushed social worker typing their key points of the conversation, without any thought to who might be reading this in the future. Whereas the right is a co-produced piece where the red text is my life story worker sharing her sense of my story, and then the blue text is me reflecting on it as a teenager. Don't worry, I'm dyspraxic. I'm always confusing my left and my right. But yes, it's a lot more human on the right. So what I try to use this slide, this activity for, is to highlight that difference between humanizing, and as a result, I'm using my lived experience, people's writing about my lived experience, and then also sharing not so good and good practice. And this influences change. So this is one enablement of autoethnography. Okay, I'm nearly done anyway. Thank you though. Yeah, it is shorthand and clipped. It's a social worker who's rushed, just trying to make the key points of the conversation. There is no humanization, whereas the right is more human. Okay, so I've got a couple of minutes left now to think, but just to reiterate the definition of autoethnography and what this can enable. So it uses this is from Ellis and Arthur, Ellis and Buckner, sorry. Autoethnography uses systematic sociological introspection and emotional recall to try and understand an experience we've lived through. And then we write our experience as a story. And that's very much how I've used it. If there are any quick questions now, we can have 2 minutes, but if not, then save it for 2 o'clock. But yeah, thank you for listening to me.